This is Dan Bolen, and I'm the host of the podcast, The Courage to Be Courageous, where people from all walks of life can come and listen to stories of those that have used courage to get through their fear. Fear is a part of our life, but so is courage. And we're going to have an excellent guest today. But before we start, I want to make one correction. If you go back and look at my reflective podcast that came out this last Tuesday, where I did Three Dads and a Baby, Ian Jenkins, Alan Mayfield, and Jeremy Hodges, I said they adopted the children, and that is not correct. Adoption is wonderful, but they actually fathered the children using two surrogates. So I want to let you know that two of the fathers there actually fathered the children using surrogates. So my apologies to you, Ian, Alan, and Jeremy. We got it corrected now. And of course, in the podcast, it is correct. So we're looking forward to listening to, I call it my international guest, even though it's just a little north of the United States, Larry Smith from Canada. And Larry, it's such a pleasure to have you. Welcome to my podcast. Tell us a little bit about yourself. First of all, you have a bachelor's in drama, a BF in drama, and then acting and directing. Did I get that correct?
Yeah, a Bachelor of Fine Arts, it's called, yeah.
Bachelor of Fine Arts, very good. So tell us a little bit about your history, your story. I think it's fascinating because you were certainly raised as a part of evangelical religion. Tell us a little bit about your dad and how that all came to be.
Well, my father was an evangelical minister of a church called the Church of Christ, which I think is quite a popular church in the southern United States, and also here in Canada. It's quite popular in the Maritimes and on the Prairie provinces. It's very fundamentalist. It's a very literal interpretation of the Bible. It's also quite restricting. It doesn't allow, we couldn't dance. There was no alcohol in the house. Playing certain games was not allowed. We couldn't play poker or any kind of card game which involved gambling. So it was, I was born in Regina, Saskatchewan, which is in the middle of Canada. And we were there in Saskatchewan for 5 years. And then my dad got a new job as a minister in a place called Portage-la-Prairie, which is near Winnipeg, Manitoba, which is above what maybe people who are listening, it was above North Dakota or Minnesota. And we lived there for 10 years. And that's where most of I always think of that as kind of home. And then in my last 2 years of high school, I had 1 year of high school, and then I skipped grade 12 to take a first year university because there was allowed to do that at the time to get the senior matriculation.
Okay.
My father took a job in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, which is in the Maritimes of Canada over by the Atlantic Ocean.
Now, you have an older brother and a younger sister, and you mentioned that when your mother had a very difficult birth with you, and that it brought some, I guess you'd say, using of opioids to be able to get through that for her. Tell us a little bit about how that occurred.
Well, I was a rough birth. Congratulations to my mother for choosing to have a natural birth, which was very rare in that time, 1955. She chose to have a natural birth, and she was determined to have a natural birth. However, I had some complications in the fact that I was coming out head up and like face forward instead of head down. And the doctor couldn't get to her in time before I came out, and it caused a lot of damage. And she went into a bad postpartum depression after that. And she was prescribed Valium at the time. And I believe she was on some sort of medication until just before she died.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't say she was on opioids. That's not. They were mood altering drugs.
Okay, great. I stand corrected on that. But you mentioned when we talked yesterday that you had some guilt because you felt somehow you were responsible for that.
Well, I my brother talks about the fact that he had a lot of resentment towards me when I was born because it took Mom was not feeling well, and he'd had all the attention up to that point, and then I arrived, and Mom was sort of indisposed, and he blamed that on me because of the difficulty of the birth. And I mean, I think that I believe that I kind of carried some of that guilt with me.
Yes, I get
unconsciously. Yeah.
I understand that. Now, let's talk about your childhood, because you were not necessarily interested in boy things. You were interested in differently. So tell us a little bit about what you were interested in, and it was different than what most boys are interested in.
Well, I, at a very early age, became interested in music and singing, and also in drama. So my mother, I still have pictures of myself on the church steps leading the kids in the neighborhood in choir practice. And at a very, I had a very beautiful soprano voice, and so I would end up singing in church a lot, and I also sang competitively in festivals around the area, and won quite a few prizes for my voice. So
wow.
I was interested in the arts. I read a lot. I liked to role play and do things like that. But I wasn't interested in sports. Like competitive sports had no attraction to me. So I often in gym class, especially, I was just out of it because I didn't know the rules. And God forbid they teach you the rules when you're in gym class. They just assume you know how to do it. And it was tough because I got teased a lot for that. And I just felt, and it also kind of put me on the outside. So I never felt like I was part of the norm. I think I told you this story last night where I went over to a boy's house. He invited me over to play with matchboxes, and I had no idea what I thought he was talking about, literal matchboxes. And he was talking about those little steel toys that they used to come in a matchbox. And once I saw the trucks and the cars, I went, "Oh, I'm out of my league here," because I have no idea what he's talking about, what kind of car. And so there was a lot of sometimes where I felt like I was acting out a role that I was supposed to be, just to survive a bit. And I was bullied a lot because of that. I had pretty consistent bullying in elementary school up until about grade 10, grade 9. I also gained a lot of weight because of that. Chocolate became my
food of choice.
Yeah, my Valium, I guess, or my comfort food. And I gained a lot of weight and became extremely overweight for a child. And then I lost it all of a sudden in grade 9. I wanted to be an actor, and I looked at myself in the mirror and I went, "You're going to have to lose some weight."
Yeah,
and I
want to I got to tell you a little bit about Tell me a little bit about your skipping championship.
Oh, yes. The only kind of sports that I was interested in, there was two. One was, the rubber ball that used to, I could bounce that. I was one of the champions, but I was also extremely good at double Dutch skipping. Like I was one of the champions in the neighborhood. And I think the girls actually resented that because that's their territory. And I was excelling in that. And it was good exercise for me. It just wasn't what any of the other boys were doing. There was no other boy doing double Dutch or skipping at all at recess time, except for me. So it was, that only made me feel like I was more on the outside than in the inside.
But you also went to your dad and you asked him to teach you how to bat in baseball.
Yeah, what I wanted to do was just be able to, so that because there were times where you were forced to play baseball, and I wanted to be able to at least hit the ball. So he took me out in the yard, and we did this. I was determined to learn how to do that. It took me about 3 or 4 days before I actually felt comfortable that I could, and I got pretty good at it. Actually, I could hit a ball, but initially, like it was a skill I wanted to learn as a survival skill. To just be able to go, oh, I can do this without being laughed at.
Right. Well, this had to be a hard time in your life too. It took some courage to get through that. And I know that also you went through some bouts of depression, because here your father is a part of organized religion, is a minister in a very conservative church, very controlling. How was your father reacting to you, knowing that he sees you doing things that are not common for normal boys to do? How did he react to you at that time?
My theory is that I was new territory for him. He didn't know what to do with me. He appreciated my academic skills, my reading, but the fact that, I wasn't interested in sports at all, that I would spend an afternoon watching a movie on TV instead of being outside.
Yes.
Or I would lie on the couch and read a book for a day. Like that was just not in his vocabulary. And I also was much more emotional than I think he was expecting me to be. There's a story my father likes. We were visiting my cousins in Alberta, and they had a small record of Shirley Temple telling the story of Bambi. And it was a Disney one. So it had the soundtrack from the movie. And I sat in my cousin's room while everyone else was out playing in baseball. And I cried while I was listening to this record.
It's interesting. I cried during Bambi too. I remember I did the same thing.
When I reminded my father of this, he just went, "Oh, that's so typical, Larry."
Well, that's
so. I think there just was a vulnerability to me that I don't think he understood. As a male to a male, he didn't quite understand or know what to do with it.
And then when he moved to this place that was home for you and moved to the island, is it Prince Edward's Island?
That's right.
That was very difficult for you because you felt alienated and isolated again, and there wasn't the cultural things and theater that you could do there. Tell us a little bit about the difficulty for you there.
Well, part of the difficulty was because the year before I had kind of soared into a new popularity, which was because I had lost all this weight and I had grown 6 inches. And suddenly I was in a big theater production at the school. I was going to be the yearbook editor. I had sort of a newfound popularity. I had a girlfriend. Things were. I was doing well, and I was also all planned to go and take acting lessons in Winnipeg at the Manitoba Theatre Centre, and my dad took a position in this small city on Prince Edward Island, which was half a whole, like it would be like moving from Montana to New Jersey. So it was a huge difference. And it was an island, and it had an island mentality. It's beautiful there in the summer. It's gorgeous. But as for me, and I think there was a big, big adjustment for the whole family. I think we all had trouble adjusting because we were from away, and I felt really alienated in my class. I was in grade 11, and I was having a trouble finding people to talk to, and I went into a depression. I know that for those 2 years that I was there, and I just wanted to study really hard and get off that island. And this is if anyone from Prince Edward Island is listening, it's not because it wasn't so much the island. It was very hard as a teenager to go through that transition.
And at this particular point, were you questioning your sexuality? Because you mentioned that you questioned it for a while. You were not sure where you were as far as gay, straight. Would that be a correct statement for you at that time?
I'm not sure what was going on at that time because I was so down. The girl that I had been seeing in Manitoba came out to visit me, and there had been a shift in something with me, and I put it down to depression at the time. I knew that there was something going on where I felt that I couldn't connect, and I don't think it was at that time that I started. Well, it could have been at that time that I was questioning it, but I didn't. I couldn't figure. I don't know whether it's hard for me to look back and go, what was going on in my head? But I think there was a period there where I was going, I think I might also find men attractive. Mm-hmm. And that was, but it wasn't clear. It wasn't clear.
Yeah. And so at that particular time, you had not had, relations with a man or a woman. Is that correct at that time?
That's right. Well, I mean, she and I used to play around a lot.
Right.
And we did quite a bit, but we didn't ever have sex.
Right. Very good. So you mentioned that when you were in the island there, you felt, again, like an alien, that you didn't quite fix. You didn't exactly know who you were. Frustrating for you, and of course led to some depression. Tell us a little bit about how you got off of the island and how were you able to get more into the theater. Tell us a little about how that happened, Larry.
Well, I wanted to go study drama, which was my parents were okay with that. I had also just received a scholarship from the University of Prince Edward Island, a math scholarship, so which was
interesting.
It's like kind of totally the opposite of where I wanted to go. It is, yeah. And I could have had a 4-year scholarship based on the fact that I had the highest math mark in the freshman class. And my dad said, and I said, I don't want to study math. I want to go and study drama.
Yeah.
And my dad said, So I went to the University of Calgary, which is on the back on the other side of the world, and studied in the drama department there for 2 years at that time. And it was in that period that I also started experiencing, I had my first male sexual encounter, and kind of started to become familiar with the world outside the church. And I think it was very hard for me because when I was at home, it was a very sheltered and enclosed culture. So I didn't know a lot about what really went on in the world, except what I'd read in books and what I'd seen in movies. I had my first drink when I went to University of Calgary. There was a lot of food things that I didn't know about. It was like a whole new territory opening up, and it was a bit terrifying. I remember, later on when we talk about this, but I did have, and then I also started to question about the existence of God at the time, because of being outside of the church, suddenly a whole bunch of questions would suddenly started coming at me. And I think I was overwhelmed, quite overwhelmed, feeling a bit naive about the world, you know?
Do you think also at that time when you see that the control of organized religion and not being able to go outside the box because there's pain and suffering if you do that because of what the church teaches, do you think that a lot of that hit your shame base?
Oh, yes, yes. I mean, I believe we grew up. I grew up, anyways. I can't speak for my brother and sister, but I grew up with this feeling that there was a safety. If you were in the church, you were safe. You were saved, safe and saved. And anything outside of the parameters of the church, you were in danger of being dragged into hell, like the burning inferno. And it was, I was terrified of what could happen out there, terrified, but also curious. Mm-hmm. I was curious, like what can be so terrible that, I've grown up thinking that this is just that like drinking was the worst thing in the world. I mean, we just didn't have it. There was no liquor in the house.
Well, and it's also, you mentioned to me one time you went into some house and they had a bar in the house.
Yeah,
and you didn't even know what it was. I mean, that's pretty naive.
I'd only seen it in the movie, so yeah. I was just kind of going, "Oh, people actually, what is that?" So it's a bar, and there was just all this different kinds of alcohol, and I was just like, "Wow!" I didn't know people had this. Really, I thought it was more, life in other homes was quite different from life in our home.
Yes. Now, let's talk about, you're now in college, you're doing the work that you want to do, and then tell us how you met Joanne and how that occurred.
Well, I was in college, and so there was quite a period of time before I actually met Joanne. I think I was in university in 72, 73. And I had a relationship with a guy there, Brian, and he and I, we kind of hooked up and lived together, and we went to Europe together. And then when we came back from Europe, we lived together in Toronto and shared a place. Eventually we were the relationship started to grow apart, but we still shared a place. And then I came back to Calgary to study, to finish my degree, because of being so overwhelmed from the first 2 years, I decided to leave it for a while because I needed to experience more life. Yes. And I made an attempt to finish my degree, ended up working at Theatre Calgary, which is the regional theater, and Joanne was working there. And we were hanging out together doing some publicity for a show, and we were having a lot of fun. And we started to fool around together, and we were extremely attracted to each other. I fell in love with Joanne, we started living together. I wanted to go down to LA and try my luck there. And we went down there for a while and then came back, and we decided we wanted to have a child, which was something we discussed from the very beginning, that it would be great to have a child. And we had a child. Her name is Genna. She's 40 now, but she's the love of my life.
Now, what's interesting, because Joanne knew that you had relationships with men before you got married.
Yes.
Okay. So tell me how, but you didn't talk a lot about that, but she knew that you had relationships.
We did talk about it before. We did talk about it initially when we met, because I was actually in a relationship with another man when I met her, and I had to make a choice. And it was also complicated, her feelings, like whether we were going to really keep doing this relationship or not. But then after we got into the marriage, those discussions didn't occur about, because we were in a marriage. I mean, I wasn't talking about, attraction to men.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
And you had this beautiful daughter, and as you mentioned, named Gemma. And also, what seemed to change, I mean, you had a beautiful daughter. You've always loved children. And you have a granddaughter, I believe, who you're in love with. Oh, you have two? Okay, you got two. And so, okay, well, let's talk about...
She just Gloria just tried to call me before we started here. I had to tell her she was eating a chocolate chip cookie and wanted to show it to me. And I said, I'm sorry, I have to do it. I'm doing a podcast. I'm doing an interview. I said, I'll call you in the morning.
That's beautiful. So let's talk about you went to a seminar called The Pursuit of Excellence, and to confront some of the walls you have. Larry, tell us a little bit about what went on with that and what that was all about.
Well, in the 80s, there was a lot of these kind of programs that were to help with productivity, to help you break through walls, basically EST-based programs. And Joanne and I both took this. Then we went to a retreat that was part of an extended part of the program, where you would look at, I think it was a whole week long, and you couldn't talk, and you couldn't talk outside the seminars. And it was about facing your wall. And at the end of that session, I realized that my wall was the fact that I felt I couldn't be my authentic self without being able to talk about my attraction to men and women. Like I had to be able to be true to who I am and who I had been, like my history. I felt that I needed to be able to just go be truthful to people and say, this is who I am. I came back from that and we started this discussion about that, and it didn't go well. So that was the start of the end of the marriage.
And all you wanted to say was, I want to stay married to you, Joanne, but this is who I am. This is a part of my history, and I just need to verbalize it and be open with it. And that's where she had difficulty with it. Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, this is my memory of it. Mm-hmm. We were also at the same time considering having another baby, and I think that that this kind of revelation from me, or what she thought was a revelation, it kind of destroyed a dream that she had. So for me, it was just wanting to be authentic. I just wanted to be able to go, this has been a part of who I am. And, if I'm talking to somebody, I don't want to go and pretend, oh no, I never had that, or I've never slept with a man. I just didn't want that to be obliterated from who I am.
Well, I mean, it took a lot of courage to do that, Larry, to make yourself that vulnerable and that open. And because of that, and this happens in many of our lives, it happened in mine as well, when you are vulnerable and transparent, it can lead to a divorce, which was the case, because you mentioned to me yesterday when we talked, one of the hardest things in your life and the grieving was divorcing your wife.
Yeah, it felt like I was being torn apart. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot. I mean, there was the fear of losing touch with my daughter. That there was a lot of fears wrapped up in it that weren't really based on anything real, but I had more about sort of internalized shame
Yes.
of proceeding with this, and that I would be punished somehow.
Yes. Getting back to organized church rules, right?
Yeah.
That's the damage that has done to so many of us today, too. So tell us a little bit about you fighting for custody and how you and Joanne were able to work that out.
Well, what was important to me in the divorce was that I had joint custody of Gemma, and that initially was not agreeable to Joanne. But after I waited, which was the advice I got from a lawyer that I'd gone for some consultation, she just said, "Wait." She said, "Initially, right now, it's not a good time. Everything's fresh. The wounds are really fresh. If you can be patient, I think, you'd have a better chance." And she was correct. Like 2 years later, well, we didn't, we sat on this for a long time. And 2 years later, Joanne, I got emotional, but Joanne phoned me up and I can remember her just saying, you're a great dad. I don't know. I was afraid. And I said, I think I understand. And I said, thank you. Thank you. This means a lot to me. Mm-hmm. I didn't want any part of the condo or any sort of material thing. All I wanted was the joint custody.
And that was really courageous on Joanne's part.
Yes.
And she knew who you were and the love you had for Gemma, and what a great gift she gave you as well. Now let's tell us about the situation. I think this is such a cute story about you coming out to your daughter, and you had a man in your life, and you felt it was time to come out to her because you were going to be doing a TV post for AIDS. And so you said, we need to talk to Genna about that. This is such a great story. Tell us a little bit about that, Larry, again.
Well, there was a PSA that had been filmed where I was the face of the AIDS organization that was in Calgary, and just about taking precautions and about prejudice against. This was in the 90s, I think, before the cocktails were really prevalent, and it was So I talked to Joanne about it, and I just want to preface this in saying that Joanne and I have a really good relationship right now. And we really worked hard at being able to be parents of the child and to keep our relationship civil, so that for Gemma's case. And and we've been really successful at that, I think. But at this time, I talked to Joanne. I said, I think we should talk to her, because if someone at the school sees this ad and they wonder if about who I am, and I said, we need to just tell her. And so we rehearsed this whole scenario, like how we would talk about it. We had it it was almost scripted, so because we were nervous. And so after school, I think she was about 10, maybe, and we sat her down and I said, that my partner and I, we're more than just friends living together. She goes, mm-hmm. I said, well, we actually love each other, and it's almost, we're more partners in love than anything else. And she goes, oh, I know. And I said, then we call this a gay relationship. And she said, oh yeah, I know. I read your book. And and Joanne went, book? What book? And and part of me was going, what book? I have no idea what you're talking about. And we had bought this book that we planned on giving Gemma to look at about I have two daddies, I can't remember the exact title of it, but it was about two gay men living together and with a child. And she had been down in my study and she had pulled it out and read it. And she'd never told me that she'd read it, but she had absorbed this information and just went, "Oh, that's what's going on." And I found that it was such an anticlimax to this dramatic revelation that we were going to give her, and she just came through as usual, surprising us.
Yes, wow. So she was totally accepting of you.
Yes.
Again, sometimes the worst fear we create in our own mind, because we just do that. We just automatically think it's going to be worse than it is, too. So, Larry, we're going to share briefly with us about the relationship you had with a gentleman in your life, that you were together 10 years, and you chose not to pursue that. I think you made a comment when we talked yesterday that you lost yourself. You lost the relationship. Yeah. I think our podcasters would like to know, because many of us may be in situations with people, how did you lose yourself? And after 10 years, why did you decide to leave each other?
Well, first of all, I have to say the decision was mostly his at the end. So it became my decision by default. Secondly, I think it was a very codependent relationship for me, anyways, because I got entwined in his business, and it became kind of my identity for those years. I feel like what happened in that period of time was I surrendered to this relationship, or to him, because I was not sure about who I was, about what my real identity, like who I am, and not feeling that positive about my abilities and my identity.
You made a comment yesterday. We were talking about surrender, and you made a real powerful statement that I so related to. You said when you're raised in religion, organized religion, especially when it's so restrictive, it's always sacrifice, sacrifice, sacrifice.
Yes.
And Jesus sacrificed. You have to sacrifice who you are to be able to please someone else. That is such a powerful comment when we think about it. And I can really relate to that in my own situation. Sacrifice, sacrifice, sacrifice. Jesus sacrificed. And what happens when we sacrifice unhealthy, we lose who we are. Mm-hmm. We lose who we are as a person. Yeah. And I talked about before about nobody defines who I am except me. Religion doesn't define it. My partner doesn't define who I am. The community doesn't define who I am. And certainly organized religion does not define who I am. I define who I am. Now, I may choose somebody in my life who will complete my life, but they don't define me. And I think that's kind of what you were saying, Larry, is that you surrendered yourself through sacrifice, because organized religion taught you to sacrifice. And you were questioning who you were.
I believe it was like being programmed to do. Yes. I feel like there was a bit like I was programmed to do that. And it's taken me a long time, and I'm still in the process of kind of deprogramming that and looking at actually what is love and what is a healthy relationship. Because I think, I think we're all have had this experience where we end up in a relationship, repeating relationships that we are familiar with when we grew up. And I had
we just keep making the same mistake if we don't really acknowledge. We just keep mistake after mistake after mistake. But I think I've seen that in a lot of relationships.
And I had a workaholic father, and who was away from home a lot, and didn't really communicate a lot of his emotional self. It was difficult for him to be vulnerable, and I've been in relationships with people who have, men especially, who have had those same characteristics.
Gotcha.
So yeah. So I think, but together with the church's teachings around sacrifice and giving and giving and giving and how I've interpreted what was being taught me when I was going to Sunday school, etc., is that this is something that God wants you to do. Is you don't think about yourself. You don't. The less you think about yourself, the better. And also then looking at a father who I oftentimes in my childhood, I basically thought he was God. Like there was he seemed to have a direct line from the Almighty, and so I kind of he was basically God to me many times, and it's taken me a long time to sort that out, to be able to go, oh, this is my father and this is my other. I need to look at a new relationship with God or a new concept of God. And a lot of this growth in that has come out of spectacularly awful relationships.
Yes. I mean, and that's where the gift is. We don't see I said before, we don't see the gift at the time.
Yes.
How the hell can I see a gift out of this? But it does come. It just takes a while to see that. And I want to talk about one thing here about being enough is enough. We talked about that yesterday. And sometimes we struggle with our own self-worth. Am I really enough? And you've made some really incredible comments about that and how you still wonder if you're enough, but you're working on it.
Yeah.
So tell me, what's that mean? What does that mean for you? Why don't you feel you're enough?
Why don't I feel I'm enough?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
that's another hour.
Yeah, that is. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. What I meant by my comment is, I mean, you feel at times you're doing tremendously better with it, but you still struggle with, am I enough? Am I enough?
I think that just having grown up feeling that I was on the outside all the time, and that there was and seeing that I was different than other boys that were around, and not just in terms of sexuality, but also in terms of artistic expression and sensibility, and what I found interesting and what I didn't find interesting, like all those kind of things. I think it's hard not to grow up thinking there's something wrong. There's something wrong, and I think for me to learn that I don't have to change anything, I don't have to acquire anything, I don't have to put on a mask, I don't have to be something else. The more I find how my authentic self, the more I'm true to what I feel is my spirit, what I feel is my expression, the more I am enough.
You are enough. And I think defining who you are, being your authentic self, is enough. We sometimes use other things to say we're not enough. Organized religion, overachieving, because we don't really feel our authentic self is enough. And I think it comes down to self-love. When you love who you are and you have that gift of love for yourself, you can really extend that authentically to others. And when you're not enough and you're struggling with who you are and not liking who you are, then what you're extending is inauthentic. It's inauthentic. And that's a really a powerful statement. And Larry, you're a great person. It's just such a pleasure getting a chance to meet you and spend some time with you. One of the things I wanted to ask Larry today, when our podcasters hear his great story, the courage that he's shown, what would you like by your life and your story that you shared with us today, a lesson that your story can teach some of the podcasters that are listening today? What would you like to say? Because some of them may be struggling very similar with what you and I have struggled with in the past. What would you like to say to them, Larry?
I would say that in the last 10 years, when I've been coping with a lot of different things that were surprising me, which I won't go into because it'll extend us again. But when I've had bouts of depression, I've struggled with feeling loved or being enough. What sort of started to shift that for me was being able to express that, to be able to actually say it out loud to somebody, to find somebody who I could talk to, somebody that I knew that would not judge me when I would start to talk about things that were going on. And that's an important one, is that it's almost like if you're a writer and you are showing someone your first draft, you're going to pick somebody who will be, you want somebody to be honest, but you don't want somebody who's going to tear it down. And when you're going, who can I talk to? And I've had so much fear in my life, so much fear. It's about being very discerning about who you talk to, about finding. You talk a lot about community, and I think that's very important. And I have found a community. It's not my community is not really the gay community, but it's the acting community that I have nurtured. And I feel very supported there. And in the classes that I've been taking, I've been very vulnerable. And I think the more vulnerable, which is the most terrifying thing I think that we do, is to open our hearts and be able to say, whoa, this is what I'm going through. It's not pretty. But I'm telling you this. And then, I have just found so much peace. It gives me a lot of peace to do that.
Wow, that's a powerful comment. And that's so true when it comes to community. Having a voice, being able to be open and honest, and finding individuals that will not judge you, but will be able to give you encouragement to continue to be authentic. That's such a powerful comment. I want to make a comment about what Larry told me here that I think is real powerful. Ideology of your childhood be your ideology of life. Change is constant. And that is such a good comment. Would you like to make a comment on that?
Yeah, I strongly, strongly believe that. I think it was not Freud, but who was the other, Jung, who said, a similar comment. I can't quote him exactly, but he talked about the beliefs that you have change through life. What you believe in childhood has to change as you go through different stages in life. And I think if you hang on to things that aren't working anymore, that don't feed you, that don't give you what you need, I think that's damaging.
Well, I agree with that too. And I want to comment. I know Larry's in a good relationship with Mark, who's out of Los Angeles, and I know he has a firm there because I've talked to him. What does he actually do there?
He has a PR firm called MPRM, and he does a lot of PR for independent films, television, I think they're expanding now into sort of the digital world. He was just here in Toronto. I'm in Toronto. So he was here for TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival. And he had several films that they were helping promote and look for sales. And so, he's quite successful with that. Very successful with that.
Excellent. Isn't it interesting when we have all of this things we've been through and relationships that didn't work, and we've learned from them so we don't keep repeating the same mistake over, and be our authentic self, then I think people will be attracted. The people we want in our life is our partner will be attracted to that. They will love who we are because it's honest and it's open.
And that's one of the great things about my current relationship is that we have been able to go. I said, I'm bringing this baggage with me. I apologize if I'm acting kind of weird right now, but this is baggage, and we talk about it, and that's been fantastic.
Oh, fantastic, Larry! You've been such a gift to our podcast. I appreciate your courage and being open and honest and very vulnerable. I think your story will be powerful for many of our listeners on our podcast that listen to our podcast. Thank you so much, Larry. I'm looking forward to meet you and Mark in the near future.
Great.
So
I look forward to that too.
Okay, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye-bye.